But how do people feel about what's going on, not only with the government shutdown, but about our nation and the economy? We say this as North Carolina has a big showdown happening today with this House of Representatives potentially changing rules and changing their electoral maps to benefit Republicans in the state. To talk about that in a recent poll, we have with us now Dr. Jason Husser from Elon University. He is the leader of the Elon poll there and a political professor. We appreciate you for joining us. We're going to see if we can get his audio straightened out just real quickly. We could see him. He could probably hear me. Just want to make sure that we have everything situated for him real quick. But as we're doing that, again, I wanted to set the stage. Again, today we are monitoring the vote that is supposed to take place in North Carolina and their House of Representatives on that new electoral map that GOP leaders there believe will give them an extra seat in the U.S. House. This after the Senate passed that just earlier this week, and now it's up to the House of Representatives. Okay, I do believe we have Dr. Husser with us now. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you great. Thanks for having me this morning.
Thank you for joining us. A very busy day in your state today and just here recently. But first, we're going to talk about what we're seeing when it comes to this vote potentially today in the North Carolina House, right? We're expecting, again, for state House leaders to approve along party lines that new map that will give Republicans a favorable seat in the U.S. House of Representatives ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. What kind of impact could this have on North Carolina, and do Democrats have any way of stopping this?
You and I covered fairly extensively back in the 2024 election, this North Carolina District 1. That's North Carolina's only really competitive district. We're a big state in North Carolina. We have a lot of rich electoral votes, a lot of House seats. But of all those House seats, and even in a 50-50 or 52-48 divided state, there's really only one district in which that's competitive, and that's North Carolina District 1. It's in the viewing area of folks watching this now. It's in the northeastern part of the state. It was one in which Democrats picked up by only a few thousand votes in 2024. And now what's happening is that the General Assembly in North Carolina, which is overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans, has said, no, we're going to change the map again. I think this is the 7th map change in about 9 years that we've had in the state. And we're going to draw the map in such a way to give Republicans an edge up. The likely outcome of this is we're going to have a new map for next election cycle next year in North Carolina. And that map is likely to give Republicans one extra seat. Not guaranteed, but likely.
And it's my understanding that Democrats and the Democratic Governor Josh Stein, there's nothing they can do to stop this. By the way, you were talking about that District 1. That's in our district here, too, in Northeast North Carolina. Don Davis, one of only 3 black Congress members in the state of North Carolina. Democrats can't do anything to stop this, can they? Once that vote comes today, is it law?
North Carolina has a weak governorship institutionally. That doesn't mean the person is weak who's inhabiting the office, but the office itself is weak. And the big reason for that is that the governor of North Carolina has a very weak veto. It's a veto that can be overturned relatively easily, and it's a veto that can't really get involved in certain things. And one of those things is maps. So district maps about how redistricting happens. The governor has no veto power over this. Republicans have clear majorities in both the House and Senate. They run into some issues in the House when they have a veto that they can't override. But in this case, there's no override. The map looks like it's going to pass soon, and it's going to be a situation where it will likely be challenged in federal court. I don't want to speculate on pending lawsuits, but my sense is we are likely to see this map going forward, making it really hard for Don Davis to hang on to this seat. Now, it's not impossible. Republicans have blown some elections recently in North Carolina. The most recent governor's elections, an example of that. They should have done way better. So just because the map is going to be drawn the way it's going to be drawn doesn't mean it's a lock or a guarantee that Democrats will lose the seat, but it certainly doesn't help, and it really pushes the odds that Republicans in Washington are going to get one extra member of the House thanks to the North Carolina State Republican Party.
Don Davis, by the way, won that seat by 2% in the last vote. You're talking about how competitive it was, but he's also considered a very moderate Democrat as well. Let's move on to something that you all at the Elon poll have recently gathered. You've conducted a series of polls from people there within the state of North Carolina. When it comes to this, the North Carolina GOP has been very open and forthright that they are looking to change these maps at the directive of President Trump in order to help their party. In this poll that you all just released within the last week or so, you looked at how North Carolina residents feel about President Trump's performance and their feelings ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. What did you learn?
We've been busy doing surveys of North Carolina and finding out what people really want to see happen on the ground. What we're finding is that President Trump's popularity is currently slipping in the state. It's not to a point where if I were a Republican consultant, I'd say, hey, let's panic, the room's on fire. But it is a situation in which what we're finding is that independents who voted Trump in North Carolina have basically are telling us that his economic promises have not come to fruition. He hasn't lived up to his promises on the economy. So what we're finding is that most of the state thinks the economy is C grade or lower. We asked them to grade it on an A to F basis. When we talked about the national economy, 76% gave a grade of C, D, or F. 70% gave a C or lower to North Carolina's economy. We found people were worried about what tariffs might do. They're saying that there's been a negative impact they felt already. 44% say they're less confident in their personal financial situation compared to a year ago. Only 23% say they're more confident. And then North Carolina is a big education state, is a state with major universities, major university research centers here, has had disproportionate impacts of the federal cuts that have happened, those DOGE cuts. And we found that more often than not, residents thought that those cuts were overall not a great thing to happen. What we're seeing that play out as is that President Trump's popularity has fallen. He was a little bit underwater last spring when we last did a study trying to figure out where Trump was in the state. He was about even 42, 45, just slightly underwater. But our most recent poll just a few weeks ago, we found that that gap was now 11%. So he's 11% underwater, 39% approve, 50% disapprove. I don't think this is permanent. I think it's probably not going to be sort of a long-term slide. His party is still sticking with him. Republicans have not slipped in support for Trump. But what we are seeing is the independents that were critical to Trump winning the state in 2024 are saying, hey, the economy needs to be better for me to approve of the president.
And then for those who may be wondering, this poll you conducted with 800 residents of North Carolina, and it was between September 23rd to October 1st, which would have been the day that the government shutdown began. So this is before the shutdown started. So it'll be interesting to see how people feel about that since then. But let me ask you this, because this was taken prior to the government shutdown, there still is another issue when we talk about the economy. I think you kind of alluded to it there, the tariffs. Can you specify again what people said about their feelings about tariffs in the state of North Carolina?
North Carolina has historically been a major export state that was vulnerable in any type of trade war sort of situation with our major textile mills and other things. And when we asked about the tariffs themselves, what we found is that 46% of people said that there had been a negative impact from the Trump administration's import tariffs. Only 14% said that there had been a positive impact. When we asked people this right after President Trump took office about tariffs, what we were finding is that the Trump loyalists, the Republicans and independents who were going to stick with Trump from most situations, were basically saying, yeah, we know that these tariffs are going to be painful. They're going to have negative impacts, but it's going to be worth it in the long term. I don't know that we've seen those folks slip away from that position, but we have found sort of the folks who were like, I'm on the fence between Harris and Trump, but I think I'm going to go with Trump because of these economic issues. Then basically saying, hey, it's time to pay up. It's time to see these economic impacts, and recent job reports and other things have given them a bit of pause. Trump can still come back around and win those folks back and make sure that they turn out and vote for Republicans in the midterms. But a lot has to happen between now and then for his numbers to go back up.
And again, this is not including the impact of the government shutdown, which is now stretched into its 22nd day. And a big part of the shutdown, Democrats have said it time and time again that they're fighting for healthcare subsidies with the Affordable Care Act. That is their big messaging across all of this. Your poll also looks at people's thoughts on healthcare, because we know North Carolina could potentially be impacted fairly significantly as well, particularly with the cuts to Medicaid that took place within the big, beautiful bill, as they once called it. So what are pollsters, the people that you talked with there, what are their thoughts when it comes to healthcare in the state?
We were interested in a few things related to healthcare. One is that the state government does have some capacity to offset the federal cuts. The federal budget and the federal government's ability to spend and raise money is much, much greater than the state, but the state still can do a lot of things. And when it comes to cuts to Medicaid, what we found was that 43% of North Carolina adults wanted to see the state government increase its healthcare spending to offset those cuts. 22% said that we should maintain current healthcare spending. So not a majority wanting to see the state come in wholeheartedly to try to offset the federal cuts, but there's still a plurality, a substantial plurality of folks wanting to see the state government step in to try to offset some of the pain attached to that. We also were going into the field when there had been a number of changes about vaccines happening in the state. What we found was that a majority of folks were not actually worried about getting access to the vaccines, particularly COVID shots that they wanted to receive. We did find Democrats, more so than Republicans, had some concerns about whether they could get the types of vaccines that they come to rely upon.
You all really have been busy with these polls here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. I'm sure you're busy now conducting new polls with everything that's happening with the government shutdown. That was one. You all put out another. This one looked at public safety, and particularly I'm curious and interested about the section on the use of the National Guard from the standpoint of people who live in North Carolina. We've seen instances, obviously in Washington, D.C. We've seen the conversation and the clashing taking place in Illinois with Chicago. I'm curious what you all learned from talking with people and getting those polls back. Are North Carolinians, are they more supportive of the use of the National Guard in U.S. cities, or do they oppose?
North Carolina has unfortunately seen a set of tragedies from a shooting in Southport to attack on the Charlotte public transportation system. And so we did ask in-depth questions about what people thought should happen regarding the National Guard in the state. And we also asked city by city in North Carolina. What we found on that is that North Carolinians were very split. We did not find in any way an overwhelming number of people saying that, yes, send in the National Guard. What we found was that more often than not, people wanted to see the National Guard not employed. They did not necessarily want to see that employed in North Carolina. When it comes to overall in the U.S. cities, 47% of North Carolinians opposed to National Guard deployments, 42% supported. When you take the margin of error, it's basically divided pretty evenly between if people think the National Guard should go in. And that largely tracks in North Carolina cities themselves. We asked about the 5 biggest cities in North Carolina and whether people wanted to see the National Guard there. In Charlotte, we found some of the highest levels of support. 43% supported the Guard in Charlotte, 47% opposed. Durham also had higher levels, 41% supported. And then it fell once we looked at the smaller cities of Greensboro and Winston-Salem. Support fell to 38%, 10 points less than the amount opposed. So not overwhelming support for the National Guard in North Carolina. However, we did find that quite a few North Carolinians, particularly the more conservative North Carolinians and some of those from more rural areas, are very concerned about crime in cities, and they're also concerned about crime in public places and public transportation.
Interesting there to see the feedback from a state in which President Trump won in North Carolina. It was one of those instances where we saw the president win the presidential ticket, but then you basically had a sweep from the statewide offices with the governor, lieutenant governor, and down. So very interesting. North Carolina politics have kind of shaped up, and obviously with the redrawing of the maps as well. I'll ask you this last question here, Dr. Husser, since, for you all with the Elon poll there at Elon University, you're constantly asking questions to get information on how voters are feeling. What are the questions, the next questions that you believe your team will be asking that you're looking to get insight from people out there in the Tar Heel State?
We're currently working on an in-depth poll about education in North Carolina. We know that North Carolina, much like Virginia, ranks so well in business rankings. However, North Carolina often does not do that great when it comes to rankings of best states for education. We have certain locations in North Carolina, such as the Chapel Hill area, parts of Raleigh area, parts of Charlotte, that have very highly ranked public education, but we also have parts of the state that don't have it so much. So we're interested in what people want to see out of schools and how do they think that schools might be changed or what are some ideas that might make them better. So that's what I'm working on right now, right before we got on this call and right afterwards.
Well, I will look forward to bringing you on when that happens. And hopefully at that point, we won't still be in a government shutdown, because I'm sure that'll probably be a large portion of our conversation. As always, Dr. Jason Husser, Elon University, my alma mater. Love to have you on. I appreciate you, and thanks for your work on the poll.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
All right, sir. See you later. Thank you. Interesting stuff there, Sarah, listening to see how people in North Carolina feel about a wide variety of topics dealing with our national and their state government. It will be interesting, as I just said, to hear what people are thinking about the economy, about the president's performance, about the government, all of those things. When we get feedback after that from since the government shutdown has started, and all those polls happened literally ended the day that the shutdown began.